Es war wirklich wie dreidimensional.
It was really like being three-dimensional, like I am in different places at the same time, and yet my consciousness is independent of this body. This realization was the most impressive. I am not this body. I exist independently of this body.
Frau Schepper, Sie bieten unter dem Titel Eins-Sein Lebenshilfen.
Ms. Schepper, under the title Being One, you offer life coaching to make it easier to develop a healthy relationship with yourself. In your own life, there was an important turning point several years ago, a tragic car accident that led to a near-death experience. I would like to ask you to tell us about it again, to start with. What happened back then?
Ja, das war vor über 30 Jahren. Ich kann mich noch erinnern, ich hatte mein erstes Auto gekauft.
It was more than 30 years ago. I remember that I had bought my first car the day before and was very proud. I had saved for a long time to be able to afford this car. The next morning, I drove it to work for the first time. My partner at the time came to the car door and asked me, "Can you drive there on your own?" I was a bit snubbed that he asked me that. I said, "Sure, I can drive." I got in the car, and this accident happened a few hundred meters from my house. I was driving at 80 kilometers per hour. It was a rainy day. I was fiddling with the radio because I wanted to adjust the sound. Something ran across the road in front of me. I think it was an animal. I was so frightened that I wrenched the steering wheel. Then the car skidded and wrapped me around a tree on the right at 80 kilometers per hour. The impact was very violent. There was a farm next door. The farmer came to see me in the hospital later and told me that he was sitting at the breakfast table and the bang was so loud that he could hear it all the way into the kitchen. After the impact, there was immediately an incredible pull. It really tore me out of my body and pulled me upwards.
Immediately?
Immediately, yes. I was immediately outside my body. I also saw myself from above. I remember that, lying on the steering wheel. My head and my upper body were tilted over the steering wheel. I could still see my long hair falling over it. But it wasn't an uncomfortable feeling. I was amazed that I could see myself from the outside, but was in a different space at the same time. It was a very impressive moment.
Did you feel any pain?
Nein, in diesem Moment nicht. Ich war komplett schmerzfrei.
No, not at that moment. I was completely pain-free. There was no pain at all. It was as if I was entering another space. What really impressed me was seeing myself from above. It was really the perspective. I saw myself lying on the steering wheel from above with my head down. The car was badly damaged, I noticed that too. But very quickly, my attention was drawn to a light that I perceived. It looked like a tunnel, and that really attracted me. I approached it very quickly, and then gradually perceived a figure of light. An incredible love emanated from this light figure. It was something like a recognition, something very familiar. Even though I didn't know this figure or this being of light, we had a kind of communication, but it was like telepathy. I was then told that it was not time yet to really go to the other side, and that I still had tasks to fulfill. I wasn't told what these tasks were. Today I know that it's also about finding that out. Later on, there was also a strong motivation for me to get involved with the subject. I would actually have liked to stay, because it was just like coming home, something incredibly beautiful. I felt cared for, loved, and at home.
Although this was a completely new situation for you, it didn't seem strange to you.
It seemed strange to me, but in this strangeness, it also seemed very familiar. I always longed for that feeling of coming home. I think that was it. When this communication was over, I felt myself returning to my body. It was as if I was being pulled back into my physical body. After that, I was unconscious for a relatively long time and only regained consciousness in the hospital. I had a blackout that lasted maybe an hour and a half, and I didn't notice anything. I was rescued by the fire department. They had to cut me out of the car, and then I was taken to hospital by ambulance. When I came to, I realized that I was lying naked on a table. I was totally shocked. I didn't understand what was going on at all. Where am I? What's going on? A nurse was standing next to me. I immediately felt over my body with my hands and realized that I was missing a tooth. That really startled me. But I was in shock. He told me that I had had a serious accident, that I was in hospital, and that they had to X-ray me now because they couldn't assess how serious my injuries were.
You spoke of a blackout. Was the memory of the near-death experience there immediately?
No, not immediately. I was really in shock and was given very strong painkillers. They gave me opiates. I was in a daze because I was in a lot of pain. No, the memory of what happened back then came back little by little. But it was traumatic for me to be torn out of life like that as a 20-year-old young woman who was just starting out in life. And after this accident, I was basically disabled and could no longer do my job.
What physical injuries did you suffer as a result of the accident?
Ja, ich hatte ein großes Hämatom im Unterleib, weil das Steuerrad.
I had a large hematoma in my abdomen because the steering wheel had pressed into my abdomen and I wasn't wearing my seatbelt. My head was banged back and forth a lot. I had severe injuries to my spine. The X-rays showed tears in the edges. No vertebrae were broken, but there was a very severe compression. I had a huge whiplash injury. I also had to wear a neck brace for a long time, which is no longer done today. This caused my muscles to regress considerably. I also had to wear a corset. It was simply very painful. I was in incredible pain. Nothing was visible on the X-rays except this incredibly large bruise in my abdomen. At the time, they didn't know what the long-term consequences of the accident would be.
Hatten Sie in Ihrer
In your communication with the light being, did you also get a perspective on how things will continue in your life, or was it open?
Es war offen, weil das Körperliche in diesem Moment einfach überwogen hat.
It was open because the physical simply dominated at that moment. It was really hard for me to deal with this pain. Part of me would probably have preferred to stay and not go on living. Back then, 30 years ago, I really struggled with this stroke of fate. It really wasn't easy to deal with because I was torn out of my life and didn't know at all, will this pain ever go away? Can I do everything the same again? Will the strength come back? Will I still have restrictions in my mobility and activities? That wasn't clear at the beginning. As a result, I had severe pain in my entire musculoskeletal system for years. In hindsight, I think that the treatment at the time was not optimal for dealing with such a severe whiplash injury.
I would like to come back to one aspect of your near-death experience. You said that it was particularly impressive for you to see your body from above. What was this impression like? Like seeing yourself in a photograph, in a mirror image? Or did you have a special three-dimensional impression?
Yes,
that's a good hint. It was really like three-dimensional, like I'm in different spaces at the same time, and yet my consciousness is independent of this body. I think that was the most impressive thing. This realization that I am not this body. I exist independently of this body.
Did you also experience something like a life review when communicating with the light being?
No, at that moment I didn't have the feeling that I was looking back. It wasn't as if various stages were running through my mind's eye. It was more of a debate. Am I really doing this now? Am I really going back? It wasn't immediately clear to me whether I would really go back. There were a lot of feelings associated with this decision, and I had to wrestle with it.
Was it ultimately your decision to return?
Yes, I finally said yes. It's not that I was pushed into it, but I decided to take the step and return to this life.
And it was also clear that there was some kind of task.
Yes, exactly. I just sensed that there was still something waiting for me. If I left now, something would remain unfinished. My life isn't over yet. I was only 20 years old. I felt that I would get support if I took this step, even if it would be difficult, even physically. And then I just decided, I'm going back. I can do it.
When did the memory of the near-death experience come back?
The memories came gradually. It also had something to do with the fact that the physical pain eased more and more, and I came out of the state of shock and slowly returned to my old life, even if everything was different. I didn't talk about it much at first. I just started reading books and opening up. I read a lot of books about near-death experiences and just immersed myself in the subject. The memories came back little by little. Not everything was immediately present.
So you haven't spoken to anyone in your personal environment about this?
No. 30 years ago, it wasn't a topic that was talked about openly either. It's very different today, but 30 years ago, I didn't know what to do with it. I tried to figure it all out for myself. I felt very compelled to do so. I wanted to know, why did this happen to me? Why this accident? Why this encounter? And what is this task? I really became a seeker. I searched for answers. I think that also gave me the strength to get through this very, very difficult time.
Were you spiritually oriented in any way before this experience as a young girl?
It was difficult in the family constellation I grew up in. The relationships were very dysfunctional. There was alcohol abuse and drug use in our family. It was difficult for me to grow up in this environment. And I remember that I always had the feeling that I didn't really belong in this family, that I didn't belong here. I always felt a longing for death, a feeling that I wanted to go home. I can't stand it here. But I wouldn't describe that as a spiritual orientation. I was simply very different from the others, very sensitive too. I was the youngest of 5 children, and the longing for death was always there.
Were you in any way religiously oriented, religiously educated?
Ja, wir waren katholisch, aber ich würde jetzt nicht sagen übermäßig katholisch.
Yes, we were Catholic. I wouldn't say overly Catholic, but rather influenced by Catholicism. I sometimes clashed with my religion teacher because I was very rebellious at 14. Asked a lot of questions, questioned things, but I still wouldn't say it was spiritual in any way. I was just a bit against everything. I rebelled.
But at the same time, you were searching. That also lies in questioning.
Exactly. I simply questioned a lot of things.
The after effects are a very special aspect of near-death experiences. What has changed in your life in the long term after the experience, in your personal relationships or professionally?
Ja, es war ein Wendepunkt, weil durch diese Erfahrung.
It was a turning point because this experience completely changed my orientation. I became a seeker. I attended seminars, I trained as a medium. Another motivation was, how can I learn to get in touch with these spiritual levels? I also wanted to find out, who was this being of light that picked me up? There was an inner drive to really find deeper answers to these questions. I also wanted to know, why was I born into this family? What is the deeper reason for the difficult situations in my childhood and for this longing for death that I had? This desire to know, this desire to find out, then led me more and more onto a path. This path led me more and more to myself through many trainings and experiences, which I also had with the spiritual world. In the many, many communications with the spiritual world that I have had over the years, this has become a very important part of my everyday life and my work.
However, the basis of this desire to know was the certainty that there is a deeper meaning behind everything.
Genau.
Exactly. During the time I was dealing with this, also during my training, I thought a lot about my life and my childhood. In the process, connections became clearer to me. And I knew where these issues came from. I brought them with me also from other levels, from other incarnations, from other lives. I became more and more aware that there is a lot that is unresolved in our family, that many issues are suppressed, that there are suppressed feelings that a family member has to deal with. In this case, it was me, because I am the first in our family to take a different path. Because my siblings and my parents have completely closeted themselves off to these levels, and I am simply taking a different path now. That wasn't very well received. I was often ridiculed for it. It was all dismissed as humbug, charlatanry, untrustworthy and dubious. Over time, I was confronted with reactions that didn't exactly make it easy for me to come out with my experiences.
And these reactions also came from your family?
Yes, the reactions also came from my family. When they found out that I was going to England to do further training in mediumship, they laughed it off. It wasn't taken seriously. There's no spiritual world for my family. These levels don't exist. There's only physical reality, the here and now, and no life after death.
Keyword mediumship. There is a lot of skepticism about mediumship, especially in the sense that the medium is just imagining things. What is your way of distinguishing between what really comes from the spiritual world, from outside, so to speak, and what only comes from yourself?
The spiritual world needs something like a system. The more systematically you proceed and ask questions in a certain way, the more you learn to control your perception and communicate in this way. You always ask, can you understand this? It's not a one-way street. I imagine a family system, for example, and look at it. Where does it light up inside? Is it on my mother's side, my father's side? Which generational level? I question all of this internally. If I receive confirmation of this, I proceed systematically. I describe the character of the person, how they lived. I ask about the circumstances of their death. This is something that I then pass on. It's not the person sitting in front of me telling me all this. This brings more and more flow into the communication. It seems closer and more direct. And at some point, you're simply really in contact.
Sie hatten nach Ihrem Unfall einen langen...
You had a long healing process after your accident. You spoke of years of pain. Do you feel physically and mentally well today?
Ja, der Körper ist natürlich nach wie vor, die Verletzungen am Rücken, die waren...
The injuries to my back were very serious. It's still a bit of a weak spot for me. I can't say that I'm 100% pain-free, but I'm almost completely pain-free. I've learned to deal with the situation, and I also know how to help myself when my back gets a bit more difficult again. But emotionally, I can say that looking back, this traumatic experience and everything that followed was really a trigger for a very deep transformation of my own history, my childhood, and other traumatic experiences that I'd had myself. Today I can say that I have found myself. I feel safe within myself. I have found an inner home. I trust myself and I trust life. I didn't have this feeling for many years. There was a lot of insecurity. I spent many years dealing with the issue of powerlessness because I experienced many things that took me completely out of my inner security. It took me a few years to work this out internally, through many therapies that I did myself, but then later also through training that I did. I trained in trauma therapy and systemic therapy. All of this helped me to come to terms with my own history, to understand it. Why was my family system the way it was? Why did things happen that were very difficult for me as a little girl? I experienced sexual abuse and assault when I was 6 years old. That also kept me very busy later on, to really integrate this trauma.
Have you always carried the memory of the abuse within you? or were you unaware of this experience for a long time?
Ja, das hatte ich abgespalten, verdrängt und
I had split off this experience, repressed it. It was through these processes that I initiated and through the training courses that these issues really came to the surface. I was then really confronted with it. But I've actually always been interested in it. Even as a young woman, I read a lot about books on the subject of abuse. I suddenly had a deep understanding of why I am the way I am. It was like a piece of a puzzle, and I could make a bigger picture out of it. Looking back, I just think it was part of my healing process. Learning to really reintegrate all the traumatic experiences I'd been through and really heal, become healthy, become whole.
What is your overall picture after all your experiences? Do you believe that your life, all of our lives, follow a guide?
Ja, auf jeden Fall, weil seit dieser
Yes, definitely. Since this near-death experience, this being that picked me up has been part of my spiritual guidance. He has withdrawn somewhat and made room for a female energy. I don't think I would have been able to do what I have done without this guidance. I'm really, really grateful for the support I have received. I'm convinced that we all have such guidance. Everyone is guided, has spiritual guidance, but I see it in a more differentiated way today. The guides don't tell us, do this or do that, or this is your task. Rather, it is our task to find out, why are we here? Why are things going the way they are? Ultimately, this also led me to taking new steps and developing myself out of all these entanglements with my parents and my siblings, that I started to understand this accident in depth and came more and more into contact with my real tasks. Why am I here? What do I want to bring into the world? What do I want to help shape? What traces do I want to leave behind? These are very deep questions that have arisen. What am I called to do? What is my calling? I still follow this calling today. My work has changed a lot. Today, I integrate this knowledge from the spiritual world in many different ways. I work with family systems, do family constellations, and can use my mediumistic abilities very well. It is no longer the case that I have to make contact, but I simply let my perception flow in. For example, when I set up a system here in my practice, deceased people or previous generations also come into play. I can use my abilities very well here.
Life is a process of development and knowledge. Is that also the reason why there is suffering?
Ja, auf jeden Fall.
Yes, definitely. I have become more and more aware that certain issues that I have experienced also have to do with past lives. Because I have really delved very deep into clarifying my strokes of fate. Without these experiences, I would not have developed or would not have developed the way I have. I'm really grateful that I have experienced a part of myself through this suffering, and I've been able to immerse myself in a new field and integrate new aspects of myself.
People who are suffering often naturally long for a better world. One often hears the thought, if the afterlife is as beautiful as near-death experiences report, then I want to go there too. Why should I continue to live here? What do you say to such longings for the afterlife, which you can probably understand? Do you think it is good for everyone to cope with life on Earth?
Ja, da muss ich jetzt ein bisschen ausholen, weil mittlerweile...
Yes, but I need to expand a little on that. I now know that we choose. We choose where we incarnate, we choose the parents, we choose the circumstances, we choose to have a certain experience. We can only have these experiences in the physical body. If we have a body, we can develop our consciousness, we can grow. Without a body, it is a little more difficult. You can also develop on the other side. But I really believe that it's about mastering the experiences in the physical reality and integrating these light spheres, connecting them with being human. And this humanity includes all aspects, including suffering. Not only beauty, but also pain, fear, anger, shame, sadness. These are all feelings that are part of being human. We live in duality. It is about living through all these levels, experiencing them, and ultimately transforming them. Through my own experience, I am deeply convinced that this is possible. Without this experience, many other things would not be possible, because they involve spiritual concepts. You can talk yourself into everything and imagine a life in theory, but then it's so detached and doesn't have much to do with the actual physical reality.
To summarize, what is the most important message from your near-death experience that you would like to pass on?
Death does not exist. It's an illusion. We shed this physical tear and enter another space. We leave this space and enter another realm of experience. Just as birth is an entrance, death is a gateway, a transition into another existence. This knowledge has given me much, much comfort. Simply this deep knowledge. It's not over when we die. Everything we don't do now will come to us on the other side. I also realize this so often when I'm in contact with the spiritual world. My parents died 10 years ago. When I have contact with my parents or with the child I lost when I was young, I can see how things continue on the other side. That has given me a lot of peace, a lot of relaxation too. To know that, okay, it goes on. My development doesn't stop. At some point, I will shed this shell and my journey will continue. That's just nice for me to know. It gives me peace, gives me certainty, and it relaxes me. Today I can say that I have become very relaxed in many ways, and I'm very close to death, but in a beautiful way. Death has lost the horror that many people feel because they don't deal with it. I mean that dark cloud when someone dies. I now see death as a transition. Of course you grieve for people you love. I also experienced the death of my parents. There is pain. You have to say goodbye, you grieve. But when I see my parents today and how well they have turned out, it touches me immensely, because when they were alive, my relationship with my parents was very difficult, especially with my father. He was an alcoholic. When I see how he has developed today, it really touches me. It has also brought me healing. Through these contacts, I was able to heal many things from my childhood. What was never said, what always remained unsaid, could be made up for later. I know that you can also bring about solutions when you are no longer in your body. Something inside me simply decided that I wanted to tidy up. I want to come to terms with my life and sort out everything I don't understand. At the same time, that was the trigger for my development. And it helps me in my work today to look at issues holistically. Because someone often comes to me with a question or an issue in order to find a different perspective, to see things less in the short term, and instead to really look at the bigger picture. What is the deeper issue behind it? Why is what is happening happening? This often has to do with family entanglements. We are connected to our ancestors 7 generations back, and there are also issues that are passed on from generation to generation. There are issues that we bring with us from other levels, and it's always fascinating and complex for me to see how everything is connected. It's like a big hologram, independent of space and time. I now also associate this with my near-death experience, with this realization my consciousness exists independently of the body and independently of space and time.
Near-death experiences often talk about a mystical experience, a wonderful experience of unity. However, they and other gifted mediums say very clearly that it is not primarily about this experience, but that our lives are about a process of knowledge and development, about working on ourselves. How do these two aspects fit together? Development as an ego on the one hand, and the experience of unity on the other.
Durch meine eigene Entwicklung wurde mir sehr bewusst, dass
through my own development, I have become very aware of this when I look back now. Back then, when I experienced this, the longing for this unity was often also an escape from my pain, from the unbearable things I experienced, including in my childhood. It was important to really work through these traumas and experiences and to look into the deepest shadows, to open up to them, and to have the courage to deal with them. This released the strength in me to open up to the higher spheres and aspects of being. By working on my roots, and to recognize that I carry the divine within me, that I carry everything united within me. It has taken away a deep fear of death and given me a deep understanding of what life means when you really stand and look and walk through the valley of tears, through the pain, through the grief, through the feeling of impermanence. It probably enabled me to fully embrace life, to really live it, to say yes to my own life, to express it without trying to withdraw into this unity again, to be removed from the world. Because it can also be an escape, to escape to where it is so beautiful, where I am loved. I believe that this is exactly why we come here, to realize ourselves in the body, even though we are everything and everything is at the same time.
Saying yes to life is, I think, a very nice thought to end on. Thank you very much for the interview.
Thank you very much for taking the time.
With pleasure.